This is Becky Schultz, editor of Equipment Today magazine, and I'm here with Sarah Jensen, editor of OEM Off Highway, and we're going to be discussing reshoring in the manufacturing segment and what that could mean for both manufacturers and the construction industry. Sarah, until recently, U.S. manufacturers in all industry segments, including construction equipment and vehicles, had become increasingly dependent on materials and components that were produced outside of the U.S. because of the ability to be more cost effective in their operations. How has this impacted their ability to continue production during the COVID-19 pandemic? And now, as there's more and more of them are starting to ramp up production again.
During the pandemic, it really kind of shined a light on the fragility of supply chains for many manufacturers. If they weren't already diversifying their international and domestic supply chains, they were realizing they probably need to do so now, just because there were disruptions for many. A lot of it depended on where they were located in the US, and you had a US supplier. For the most part, it sounded like it was okay because most of those businesses were considered essential. Peter Anderson, Vice President of Global Supply Chain and Manufacturing at Cummins, stated in a recent interview on ABC's Nightline that over 80% of the company's suppliers at some point closed down, and they were still struggling with many of their suppliers as they have started to reopen and begin ramping up production more. In April, AEM surveyed presidents, CEOs, and owners of leading equipment manufacturers, and that survey found that 7 out of 10 had experienced moderately negative impact on their supply chain. And then a quarter of them said that it was very negative, the impact. So it's kind of been a mix, but a good portion of people found they had a negative impact from it. So
during the pandemic, this has obviously led to some growing discussion about the topic of reshoring, or bringing back at least some of the production of materials and components to the U.S. Can you talk about what you've been hearing on this topic?
So we've been hearing lately some of the webinars and virtual conferences I've been attending, and some of the news items we started seeing that some people are starting to consider reshoring and bringing their manufacturing back to the U.S., or maybe increasing the amount that they have here in addition to what they have in overseas operations. There was a recent Boston Herald article that mentioned that it would be beneficial to the economy. And then there was a survey from a data analysis company, Thomas, that said since March, 64% of manufacturers that were asked about it in a recent survey said that they were considering reshoring, and whereas it had been 10% before that. So it seems to be top of mind for people now.
Absolutely. And I could definitely see where reshoring could have benefits for the market segment that I cover, which is the construction industry. Certainly, if there's more manufacturing coming back into the U.S. market, you're going to see more construction of manufacturing facilities. There also could be the potential for increases in warehousing, because we need to see more capacity to be able to store materials, to store inventory that's being produced, to then ship it on over to the manufacturing sector. In general, what might reshoring, in your view, mean to the manufacturing sector? And you mentioned the economy. How is that going to impact the overall economy in what you're hearing and based on your own feelings on this?
It would help with creating jobs, and then there's more opportunities for jobs here, and then people have income and can spend. As you said, it would help the construction sector with having to either build new manufacturing or refurbishing facilities. There's also benefits for the manufacturers themselves. Their shipping costs could be reduced, because if they're getting supplies from overseas and now getting them from a closer supplier, obviously those shipping costs are going to be lower. It would help with their sustainability efforts. There's not as much emissions being produced by having long travel times, plus closer proximity of suppliers. They can get stuff faster, serve their customers faster if they have quicker supply chain or access to certain products. So there are benefits, but there's challenges as well.
Yeah, and that's actually the next thing I'd like to talk about. I mean, obviously, it sounds good to bring back manufacturing into the U.S. That's certainly, job creation, the ability to have those supplies produced here in this country. That all sounds very good, but obviously there are challenges that go along with that. And I think probably the biggest one, and the one that we're focusing on in this particular episode, is labor availability and costs. Can you talk a little bit about that from your perspective?
Prior to the pandemic, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported the average hourly wage for Chinese manufacturing workers was less than a tenth that of their average U.S. counterparts. As of June 2017, a manufacturing worker in Mexico earned roughly $2.30 in US dollars per hour, whereas the average salary for a factory worker in the US is about $15 per hour. And many in the agricultural and construction markets make substantially more due to the higher skill level required. So that is a factor that would need to be taken into consideration for many. I know some of the reports and news that we've been hearing is, maybe some investments from the government could help with that. Then there's also the training, which again, I mean, in many of the industries, both our publications cover, it's training of skilled labor and has been an issue, and getting people to enter these industries. So that would be a challenge and an opportunity again for the government to maybe help with some incentives, or, people coming and working together with universities and companies and everybody trying to work on that.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a really good point. I mean, the issues that existed prior to the pandemic haven't necessarily changed in terms of some of the challenges with the workforce for both the manufacturing and the construction sector. If you look at things along the lines of just the skill sets needed to be able to employ these people productively. One of the statistics that I saw from the Associated General Contractors of America, a survey that they released back in January, showed 81% of construction firms responding were having a hard time filling salaried and hourly craft positions. Yet they were reporting they were going to be needing to expand their headcount in 2020. Obviously, this was prior to the pandemic. They also reported that 44% of them were indicating that the staffing issues were going to be driving their costs higher, which goes back to that whole concern. Anirban Basu, he's the chief economist with Marcom Construction Group. He's also risk of people leaving the industry. He issued recently was following the Great Recession, the U.S. Department of Labor found that roughly 60% of displaced construction workers found employment in another industry. Preventing this from happening again is crucial for construction during the potential recovery. This is an issue that isn't just impacting the construction market, it's also impacting manufacturing, is the baby boomers. In addition to people leaving the industry sector during difficult times, we're also seeing the baby boomers leaving the workforce at this time. How that's being affected by COVID-19 is yet to be determined, but according to Pew Research, over a third of the workforce, or around 41 million workers, come from the baby boomer generation, individuals born from 1946 to 1964. And it's been estimated that from the time period of 2011 to 2019, roughly 10,000 baby boomers were going to be reaching retirement age every single day. Retirements continue to have a major impact on the construction industry. Roughly 41% of the current construction workforce, according to the National Center for Construction and Education and Research, including people in key management roles, are going to be retiring by the end of 2031. And let's face it, the dynamics of attracting people into the workforce haven't changed. It certainly throws out the potential that we are going to experience. It seems kind of ridiculous to be talking about workforce shortages at this point, given the number of people that are unemployed in the U.S. right now. The dynamics of the industry, the fundamentals haven't changed. Construction has had challenges in filling workforce roles in the past. And certainly, if we start to see reshoring happening, start to see demand for more manufacturing jobs, that's going to impact the industry I cover definitely, because we're going to be competing for that many more vacant spaces out there in terms of filling those jobs going forward. It also affects costs. I mean, certainly it's going to affect costs for manufacturing, I would suppose, and it's certainly going to affect labor costs for the construction marketplace.
There is a lot of high unemployment, but many of these people necessarily weren't from these industries. And to get them to enter manufacturing or construction or related industries has always been a challenge and will likely continue to be a challenge. And then training a lot of these people with the skills that are necessary will continue to be a challenge. And again, it's, having the cooperation between universities, and one article mentioned, possibly having government incentives again to help with on-the-job training to maybe make it easier. I know AEM, the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, has been petitioning the U.S. government to have more of a national strategy for manufacturing to help with these kinds of things and help support manufacturing and make it more appealing to people to do business in the U.S. and help with the job creations and possibly the investments needed to increase any maybe technology or, building facilities, whatever is needed to help increase it here in the U.S. again.
Right, and you bring up the issue of technology. Manufacturing has been increasingly turning to automation to fill some of the workforce shortages that have been seen, but also to boost productivity, obviously. That's a trend that we're starting to see more and more in the construction industry, as well as construction firms turn to things like increased mechanization, bringing in equipment in place of physical labor, or bringing in technology that can enhance the productivity of less skilled workers, technology like grade control and other things that can help enhance the skill sets of the labor force that's currently in place and coming into the market. Do you see that continuing for your industry as well?
Again, there's also been investments in that over the years. Costs have been somewhat prohibited for companies, but Global Data and Analytics Company recently put out a report where it believes the COVID-19 pandemic may actually give some sort of incentive to accelerate automation within manufacturing facilities. Because things are automated, you're maybe less reliant on having people there physically doing some of the work. And it can help increase the productivity and overcome some of the supply chain issues that occurred during this time. Then there's the International Federation of Robotics, which also recently reported that, while some have said implementation of robotics and automation in factories might take away jobs, it actually benefits them by automating some tasks and augmenting other tasks, and you still need people running or monitoring those machines, and it'll create different types of jobs, and again might require some different training. It's not necessarily going to eliminate jobs. So it seems that there could be an increase in those types of investments going forward.
Right. And I think that is one thing that we frequently hear or see comments on about automation and robotics and all of these different technologies that are being implemented, not only manufacturing, but we're also seeing more exploration of things like automated functions and automated machines, remote control, other types of technology out there that people are looking at and saying, well, that's going to take away jobs. Well, not necessarily. When you're looking at the labor shortages that are already out there, the lack of skilled operators, the challenge in getting people trained. This gives a new opportunity to not only get the production you need from a smaller workforce that isn't being replenished quickly, but also drives productivity up and allows for new jobs that have greater skill sets. Plus, it allows those that are in the workforce to do more important, less menial tasks that have to do otherwise. So I think there's definitely the opportunity. I know that we are also going to be going further into this topic of advances in technology in the transportation and manufacturing and construction sector coming up in a future episode. We won't go too much further into that at this point. Sarah, is there anything else you'd like to share?
Oh, no, that's all. I think we've covered it.
All right, well, great. Well, thank you, Sarah.